Hey everyone, in this video we're going to come back to the Road to Latin textbook and take a look at chapter 11. So this chapter has two stories. The first one is called Tullia, Magistra Filiarum I, right? Because you have a second version of this in another chapter. So it's really focused on the mom and her story, Tullia. Okay, so like I always tell you, the first thing you got to do when it comes time to understanding the story is learn the vocab. It's very difficult to translate unless you know the words. And if you want, you can take a look at my textbook. I have the story, different resources for you, to understand the vocab and understand the story, the grammar notes, videos, everything you need. Or if you just want the Road to Latin textbook, just the unedited version, right, just in a digital format, feel free to go check it out. It's on my site as well. But the first thing you got to do is get the vocab under control. Then you want to read through the grammar, which I'm going to do with you in a second, and just highlight some of the key ideas. Just so you understand, like what you're looking at and what the different forms are, and it'll just help you with your translation, honestly. And the last thing you want to do is find someone from class, partner, anyone you can find. Read this story aloud to them. Practice your pronunciation. I always say it might not feel like it, but when you speak this language aloud, you're going to start to hear the patterns. And whether or not you realize it will make you better at understanding what's going on. So read it aloud, and then even more importantly, have them read it back to you so you can listen to the story and try to get that auditory learning involved, right? Again, you'll catch the patterns. You'll start to hear different things that'll really help you understand, the stories and bring the language to life for you, right? You never want to shut off those skills. So like I said, you want to have the grammar down as one of your first pieces. And that's where I'm going to start in this video, just with a quick review of the grammar, because it is a new chapter with some new things that we have to understand. So the first thing that you want to really, focus in on this chapter is understanding what a conjugation is, okay? So in an earlier chapter, we talked about declensions, which are groups of nouns. Conjugations are the same thing. It's just a fancy word of saying a group, right? A group of Latin verbs that all use the same endings and follow the same process in terms of how they're spelled. So again, the great thing about Latin is there's so many patterns, and this is one of the patterns that we found of how we can organize this language, right? There is a pattern where every verb in Latin, unless it's what we call irregular, which we'll talk about in a second, they all follow the same pattern, right? In terms of how they're spelled and how we use them. And there's 4 basic groups, which we call conjugations, okay? So the idea, again, is that they have similar endings in spelling. And the way you know what conjugation or group a verb belongs to is by looking at its infinitive. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you pick up any Latin dictionary, you're going to see that when they list verbs, there's actually 4 pieces given for that verb. Okay, don't get hung up on that yet. We're only really focused on the first 2. The second piece in the dictionary is something called an infinitive, and it tells you what conjugation or group the verb belongs to. So the idea is if you were to look up in the dictionary and you see a verb like ambulo, ambulare, the second piece is ambulare. That are ending means it's what we call first conjugation, or first group, right? If you saw a verb like sedeo, sedere, which means to sit, the second piece, right, or the infinitive is sedere with a long ere. That's what we call the second conjugation, or the second group. Okay, so far those are the only ones we're dealing with. There are a couple more, but we're not going to worry about them yet. You just want to get in the habit of being able to look at a vocab list or a dictionary and say, oh, that's a first group verb or a second group verb. And if you want to say conjugation, feel free. It doesn't really matter. It's just sort of like a fancy grammar term. Sometimes I think that that's more like grammar jargon that makes it more confusing. Think of it as a group. You're going to be fine. Okay, so why do we care about these? Well, what you're learning in this chapter is how to take a verb and conjugate it. So again, this is where the grammar terms are kind of overlapping. Conjugating a verb means you take it and you write out all its different forms. So in other words, let's say you had the verb to walk, you would write it as I walk, you walk, he, she, it walks, we walk, you all walk, they walk. Okay, so that process is a little tricky because there's going to be different endings. So no matter what verb you get, the process is to go to the infinitive, that second part that we just saw, and drop the re. If you do this, you're going to get what's called the stem, right? So, for instance, if we had our verb ambulare, the one we were thinking about before, if you drop the re, your stem would be ambula. To that stem, you add your personal verb endings, right? So the verb endings are ost, must to son. So in Latin, the spelling or ending of the verb is telling you who's doing the action, right? You don't actually need a pronoun or a name or a formal subject. You can just have a verb ending in O, and you know that means I'm doing it. S means you're doing it, singular. T means he, she, or it, again, singular, is doing something. MUS is we, TIS means you all, and NT means they. Okay? So it's just showing you how you can take a verb in Latin and get all the different forms. So the one that you don't really need here is the O ending. And the reason why is in a dictionary, the first piece of a verb that they list is actually the first person singular present tense. It means I'm doing something just because it's so common, right? And because sometimes the way the verb is spelled is not quite what you'd expect. So we just give it to you. So if I were to recap this for you, the idea is you want to understand what a conjugation is, right? You look at the infinitive, it's either first or second group. That's what we're talking about so far. And then you want to understand the process of how you can take that verb and make it I, you, he, she, it, we, you, all, they. So here's an example. So for a first conjugation verb, again, I told you it might be something like ambulo, ambulare, which means to walk. My first answer is ambulo, right? The first part is the first person singular present tense. So ambulo means I walk. For the rest of them, I took the infinitive, ambulare, I dropped the RE, and I add my endings of st, mus, to, sunt. So I get ambulas, ambulat, ambulamus, ambulatus, ambulant, which means you walk, he, she, it walks, we, you all, and they walk. The same thing is happening, same process for second conjugation, the second group, right? The verbs where the infinitive, the second piece, is a long ERE, like sedeo, sedere, okay? So if I took sedeo, sedere, my first part there, sedeo, is my first answer. That means I sit, right? Sedere means to sit. For the rest of them, I take the infinitive, sedere, the second piece. I drop the RE, right? And then I add my endings of st, mus, to, sunt. So I get sede, sedet, sedemus, sedetus, sedet, which means you sit, he, she, it sits, we, you all, and they sit. Okay? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you and you're feeling like, okay, I can kind of do this. Okay? We don't want to get too bogged down in the grammar because you'll still be able to read the Latin and understand it without getting too crazy. But it is important to go back and read the grammar notes for this chapter, either the ones that Chesnutt and her colleagues wrote in the unedited, Road to Latin textbook, or feel free to go to my version where I've given you some charts and notes that'll help you out, and hopefully it makes some sense to you. So the last piece of the grammar that we have to understand is something called an irregular verb. It's the verb esse, which means to be. So in English, Latin, most every language, the verb to be, so I am, you are, he, she, it is what we call irregular, meaning it doesn't quite follow the same pattern. You can actually hear it in English, right? When you say I am, we use a completely different word to say you are, or he, she, it is. We're saying am, are, is. Those are three different words, right? And it makes it irregular. If it were sort of a regular verb, you might say something like I am, you am, he, she, it, am, right? Then we are, you all are, they are. Like maybe it would be something like that. But that's not how it works, okay? It's irregular because it's got a bunch of like different forms that don't quite follow the pattern you're expecting, okay? So in Latin, you just want to memorize these. And the book mentions this in this chapter, and you're going to see it in the story we're about to read. Memorize the irregular verbs because they don't really follow the pattern. The one thing you will notice, though, is that the endings are the same, except for first person singular. I am assume. It doesn't end in an O, it ends in an M, but you're going to see that M ending is actually an alternate of O. It shows up in a couple different places with different tenses. So don't get too thrown off by it. But for the rest of them, so in other words, est, right, they're ending in st, mus, to, sunt, right? Sumus ends in an mus, and it means we are. Estis ends in a tis, and it means you all are. Sunt ends in an nt, and it means they are. So even though this is an irregular verb, it's got a little bit of a pattern, right? So memorize these. You have sum est, sumus estis, sunt, right? I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, you all are, they are. All right. But like I said, if that's a little confusing, go back, read the textbook. This is just meant to be a quick overview just to remind you of what you kind of want to know from this chapter. Your best bet is to go back, read through my notes, watch the videos I posted, whatever it is you need, do the practice problems I have up there. There's some Magistra exercises too that'll help you. Anything you can do to feel really comfortable with this, and then you'll be in a really good spot to translate. Okay? So let's dive into the story. You have Tullia Corneliam et secundam linguam Latinam docet. Okay, so Tullia is your subject. Tullia, what's she doing? Docet, she's teaching. So Tullia is teaching Cornelia and Secunda, right, her two daughters, Linguam Latinum, the Latin language. So the mom, Tullia, is just teaching her daughters some stuff, which makes sense, right? The mom's at home with the daughters. In terms of the Roman family, it makes sense that she would teach them, right? If she'd been educated enough to kind of hit that, she definitely would, right? To hit that higher level of the Latin language. But either way, she would, a typical middle, probably to upper class Roman mom would know enough Latin, of course, to be able to teach her kids. Maybe not other things like rhetoric and science and math, but this is something that she would definitely teach her children. Okay. Then you have Tullia, and by the way, quick side note, docet. Notice how it ends in a T. That's because Tullia is your subject. She is teaching, right? Then you have Tullia severa magistra est, itaque puellae diligenter student. So Tullia is, there's our irregular verb to be. Est means he, she, or it is. In this case, Tullia is my subject, she. You're saying Tullia is a severa magistra, a severe or a strict teacher, right? So she's a strict magistra. And so, itaque, the girls, notice how it's plural, puellae. So since you're saying the girls, you're really saying they. So notice how the verb student ends in an NT. It matches puellae, right? The verb ending needs to match the subject. So you're saying the girls study or learn diligenter, diligently, right? They work hard because their mom is a strict teacher. Then you have the next part. You have ego sum femina, right? Ego means I. Sum is our verb to be, esse, and notice how it's sum, right? That means I am. So ego sum means I am, femina, a woman. You actually don't need the ego here. Sum means I am, right? That's one of the great things about Latin verb endings. Because the verb endings are unique, meaning it's either OST, mustisant, or in this case, MST, right? You could just say sum femina, and it would mean the exact same thing, which is something they're going to do a little bit later in this story. So ego sum femina, I am a woman. Ego sum matrona romana. Right? Ego sum, again, I am. A matrona romana, a Roman mother, right? A Roman matron, you might say, right? A married woman is kind of the idea. So I am a Roman mother. Tu, Cornelia, es puella. So you, Cornelia, right? Cornelia is vocative because she's talking to her, calling her by name. The subject is tu, which means you. Now, because you're saying you are, I don't say sum or est, I say es, es. Tu es means you are. Puella is a girl. So you, Cornelia, are a girl. Tu es filia mea. You are, tu es, filia mea, my daughter. Secunda quoque est puella romana. So now Secunda, right, the other girl, also is. Notice how it's not Secunda es, but Secunda est, because she's not talking to Secunda and saying, hey, you. She's talking about Secunda. So she is really what she's saying. That's why we have est and why it ends in a T, right? So Secunda quoque est puella romana. She's also a Roman girl. Secunda est parva filia mea. So Secunda est, my little daughter, parva filia, right? My younger daughter or my little daughter, okay? Sum matrona romana. Here we have a repetition of the line above, but instead of ego sum matrona romana, it just says sum matrona romana, right? I am a Roman matron. You don't need the pronoun ego there. It means the same thing. So the more common and fast way to do is just say sum, right? Sum can only mean I am, so I don't need the pronoun I because everyone knows sum means I am. So I'm a Roman matron. Es filia mea. You are, es, my daughter, filia mea. Secunda est parva filia mea. So Secunda is my parva filia, right? My little daughter, my smaller, younger daughter. Okay, then we get the next paragraph. You have sum incula Romae. I am, sum, in incula Romae, an inhabitant of Rome. Tu, Cornelia, quoque es incula Roma. So you, Cornelia, again, she's talking to Cornelia, which is why she uses the vocative. Tu, Cornelia, also, you quoque es, you also are an inhabitant of Rome, right? Incula Romae. Ego et tu. So I and you, or you and I, right? If you have a group of people and you're including yourself in it, you're really saying we. So you and I is another way of saying we, which is why we have ego et tu sumus, right? Sumus means we are, okay? Because it's the mom. Tullia is talking about herself, I, and she's including another person. So I and you means we. So you and I are incolae Romae, right? Inhabitants of Rome. So it's just getting the singular versus plural thing here. So I am an inhabitant. We are inhabitants, right? Inkovai. Nos sumus laetai. We, nos, are. Again, you actually don't need nos here. You could have just said sumus laetai. It would have meant the same thing. But she's saying we are laetai, happy. Why does it have an AE ending on laetai? Because it's plural, right? We are happy. You need that nominative plural ending. To Cornelia, es filia mea. You, Cornelia, are my daughter, right? Repetition of that phrase. Tu quoque secunda es filia mea. So you too, or you also, Secunda, right? Vocative, because now she's talking to Secunda. Tu es, you are my daughter, right? Vos puellae estis filiae meae. So now she's talking to both of them. You all, vos, right? You all, girls, puellae, is plural vocative because she's talking to both of them. She says, you girls are estis. You are my daughters, filiae meae, right? We have the plural here because she has more than one daughter, and she's talking about both of them, right? So she says, you both, right, are my daughters. Estis puellae carae, right? You all are. Puellae carae, your dear girls, right? You might also think of it as like kind girls is kind of what she's saying, but it's also implying like dear to me is really the idea. Lucia est filia Camillae. Okay, so Lucy, I guess, right? The more we think about it, is the daughter of Camilla. So now she's talking about another person, her friend, right? Tertia est parva filia Camillae, right? Tertia is the smaller or young daughter, right, of Camilla. So she's talking about her friend Camilla. Camilla also has two daughters, Lucia and Tertia, right? Lucia and Tertia. Lucia is apparently the older daughter, and Tertia is the smaller daughter. Okay, Lucia et Tertia sunt filiae Camillae, right? So Lucia, and Tertia are, right? They are, that's why we have sunt with an NT. They are the daughters, plural, of Camilla. Okay, so this first story is really a clever way that the book, gets a lot of repetition of all these verbs, particularly the verb to be. I am, you are, he, she, it is. It's all repetition, and they're wrapping it in a story, even though it's not really a story. It's more of a conversation, right? And just the repetition of I am, you are, we are, they are, right? Just getting you to see it over and over again. So hopefully that all made sense. I know the grammar for this chapter can feel a little dense and maybe overwhelming the first time. Read through the grammar notes again. Like I said, start with the textbook, read through, make sure you feel comfortable, and then practice this. The more you can get the repetition on this by reading and rereading the story, and do the practice problems too. On my textbook, I gave you a Magistra link that'll give you just repetition over and over and over again of sentences you can translate. Paying close attention to verbs and verb endings, particularly the verb to be. The more you practice it, the more you're going to feel comfortable with all the different variants of the verb to be, the verb endings, the conjugations, all that stuff. We'll deal more with it later. For right now, you really just want to feel comfortable with verb endings and the verb to be. And once you hit that point, you're going to be in a really good place, and you shouldn't have any trouble at all, translating this chapter or the stories that come later. If you do have any questions, put them in the comments below, but otherwise just keep at it and good luck.